The moment the words rolled off her tongue, she felt her body go numb as she collapsed over onto the sofa. The lights started to fade, and the fading of the lights turned into blackness, until she heard the mechanical noise of the door as footsteps approached her. She could hear talking, but she couldn't make it out. The last thing she thought about before she dozed off was about her father. She was scared, but thinking of her dad, how brave he is, how loving, how caring, it made her feel strong. It made her feel safe. As her mind dozed off, and she fell asleep. Shivers went down her spine as her eyes started to open up. Looking around, Daisy realized she was in a whole new place. A room, but not a pretty one. A room like a jail cell. She was laying in a small bed in the middle of the room. To her left, a toilet and sink, and to her right, a door. And ahead of her was a window. A very big window. In fact, the entire wall was a window. And on the other side was that man. That man with the mustache. The man that made her say those words. The man that knew her father. Daisy started to shiver, realizing something was wrong. Something was very wrong. It was at this time the man noticed that she was awake. As his eyes snapped to her, the room he was in looked like a lab out of cartoons she would watch. There was all sorts of different computers and a few doors behind him. To his right was a phone, an old-looking phone, like the old rotisserie phones that Mom and Dad would let us play with. His eyes not coming off of Daisy, he reached his arm over and looked as if he hit a button. That's when Daisy heard a noise, a crackle, an intercom in the corner of the room. An old-looking phone, like the old rotisserie phones that Mom and Dad would let us play with. His eyes not coming off of Daisy, he reached his arm over and looked as if he hit a button. That's when Daisy heard a noise, a crackle, an intercom in the corner of the room came to life, and she heard his voice.
Ah, so you're finally awake, little Daisy.
Daisy backed up to the wall, looked
So you're finally awake.
to life, and she heard his voice. And she heard his voice.
Ah, so you're finally awake, little Daisy. Little Daisy.
Daisy backed up to the wall, looking at the man, with a big smirk on his face. He continued,
I do apologize for the circumstances. In fact, I never wanted it to be this way. However, things have gone a little bit crazy down here. I promise I don't want to do you any harm. However, I need you to show me that you're worth the price and the time.
Daisy was confused. What did he mean, prove my worth? What did he want from her? Before she could say anything, he started talking again.
You see, Disney is magic, and something we've always loved to do is spread the magic, inventing new ways of creating and pushing the boundaries of conventional methods. I know this may be very scary for you to understand, and being a young little girl like yourself, I do understand that you might be a little scared. That's good. You should be scared. Little Daisy, you have to get through this. So you have to listen to me very, very carefully. If you want to make it out of here, you must.
The man was cut off by his phone ringing. It had one of those bell rings.
So you have to listen to me very, very carefully. If you want to make it out of here, you must.
The man was cut off by his phone ringing. It had one of those bell rings.
Very carefully. If you want to make it out of here, you must.
The man was cut off by his phone ringing. It had one of those bell rings. The unexpected noise almost had Daisy falling over.
Excuse me for a second, dearie.
He proceeded to pick up the phone. Falling over. Pick up the phone.
Yes. Is it done? Well,
Pick up the phone.
Yes. Is it done? Well, where is he now?
Pick up the phone.
Yeah. Yes. Is it done? Well, where is he now? That far? I never expected that much out of Frederick. I'll be down there in just a minute.
He hung up the phone.
Cut short.
as he stood up out. He hung up the phone. As he stood up out of his seat, he looked away from Daisy. He started to pace back and he stood up out of his seat. He looked away from. Almost had Daisy falling over.
Excuse me for a second, dearie.
He proceeded to pick up the phone.
Yes. Yes.
As he
For a second, dearie.
he proceeded to pick up the phone.
Yeah. You must.
The name was cut off by his phone ringing. I heard one of those bell rings.
Rings. The unexpected noise almost had Daisy falling over.
Excuse me for a second, dearie.
He proceeded to pick up the.
Yes. Is it done? Well, where is he now? That far? I never expected that much out of Frederick. I'll be down there in just a minute.
He hung up the phone. As he stood up out of his seat, he looked.
That much out of Frederick. I'll be down there in just a minute.
He hung up the phone. As he stood up out of his seat, he looked away from Daisy. He started to pace back and forth. He then continued to say,
It seems that our visit will be cut short. No matter. I bet you have all sorts of little questions for me, Daisy. Well, that's just the thing. Prove your worth, and all your questions shall be answered. Now, I believe I have obligations for you to meet a certain character, for a friend of yours awaits.
Daisy remembered why she was here. Could it be? No. Maybe this was just a trick.
I wish you good luck, Daisy. I mean this in a very sincere way. I do hope we get to meet again. We will literally change the fabric of the world. Do not disappoint me. Oh, and one last thing. Don't die. Don't die.
Daisy looked over.
Oh, and one last thing. Don't die. Oh, don't die. Don't die.
Our story would start off inside the hotel room where Daisy, her mother, and even her brother were. After being dropped off by her mother and brother, Daisy would be escorted to an elevator, a huge, giant box made out of metal. To a child like this, it was more like a small room, and the feeling of the elevator shifting would make any child nauseous. But Daisy enjoyed it. She's a little bit taller than most kids her age, and she very much enjoyed riding rides at the fair. Because of her height advantage, she was able to ride every single ride at Cedar Point, Disneyland, and now even Disney World. But none of that would compare to how she felt after she met Goofy, her favorite character. She was standing there in the elevator with about 4 or so men in suits, all wearing sunglasses, black suits, with a little earpiece wrapped around their ear. None of them said anything and were very quiet. It didn't bother Daisy though. She knew that adults at Disney World were generally nice. But she thought back to what her dad had always told her. Never talk to strangers, never trust strangers, and never go with strangers. The 3 rules that have always kept her safe. Daisy was wearing a pink dress dotted with yellow sunflowers. She was wearing one of those hair pieces over her head that kept her hair nice and flat, her long blonde hair flowing to the back of her. She was giggly, and she had a right to be so. In her mind, this was the greatest thing that had ever happened to her. Well, how she'd be wrong. The elevator eventually stopped, almost pushing Daisy up a little bit in the process. A ding went off as the doors started to slowly open up. One of the men stepped out. Daisy reached her hand out, thinking he would hold it to wherever they were going. He gave no such sympathy as he stared at her, almost waiting for her to move. Daisy understood as she walked off the elevator into the hallway, a long hallway with a series of doors, probably to different offices. Daisy remembered that her dad had an office, and being to his work before, noticed that he also had offices all over the building, so this was nothing new to Miss Daisy. They walked down the hall for what seemed like forever. Daisy wasn't bothered though. No matter what, nothing could ruin this for her. She was happy as could be, a smile on her face. She almost skipped when she walked doors, knowing today would surely be the best day of her life. Eventually they came up to a big door. Probably the biggest door she's ever seen. It was a double door. Kind of like what they have at those fancy little festivals. Dad used to always take her to those. One of the men grabbed something out of his pocket and held it up to the door. Another one of them checked his earpiece, and you could hear in a deep, dark voice.
Yes, sir. She's here. All right, going in now. Over.
Daisy was a little intimidated by the door, so she closed her eyes and reminded herself why she was there, and whispered to herself.
See you soon. See you soon, Goofy.
She heard some mechanical noises, and all at once the door opened. Slowly, an embraceful smell of coffee and cigarettes rushed over her as she walked forward into this room, an office of some sort. There were bookcases lining the walls, although she didn't have time to analyze any of them. There was a huge desk made out of the prettiest wood Daisy had ever seen. She noticed in the few seconds she was walking in the office. Everything was made out of this wood. It was so pretty. There was a bunch of comfortable leather seats and a big couch, also made out of leather. As she walked on, she noticed that on the couch, she saw a man. A man with short, slick back hair, a nice big sprucey mustache, holding a cigarette in one hand and an open book in the other, with his legs crossed, sitting there with what seemed to be not a care in the world. A very friendly looking man. Daisy Bell almost didn't notice the guards backing away. As they kind of left her sitting in the front, they moved almost in motion with each other. That's when she noticed the man on the couch quickly flick his wrist, as if he was signaling the big men behind to leave. She heard from behind her one of the guards reply with,
Yes, sir.
As she heard the footsteps leaving the room, and the door slowly shut with that mechanical noise, sealing her in this office with whoever this man is. She stood there, quietly, wondering if he would ever say anything. Almost as if she wasn't even there. She started to look around the room. Those books that she saw, there was quite a few of them. She could only see a couple that she remembered though, like Huckleberry Finn, books she read in class. That's something about Daisy. She loved reading books. She looked over and saw some less complicated books. Books like Alice in Wonderland, Pinocchio, and a bunch of Disney books. The ones with the pictures, like Donald Duck's Mystery, Mickey's Car Troubles, Goofy's Trip to Mars. Different kids' books. Some she read, but others she'd never heard of. The thought excited her. She barely even noticed the voice of the man who called out,
Are you going to sit down, or shall we be standing?
Daisy looked at the man, and she nodded. She quickly moved forward, sitting on one of the two chairs, facing opposite of the couch. The man, still focused on his book, began to speak to her.
So, you are the lovely, little, sweet Miss Daisy. Am I correct?
Uh-huh.
The man's attention to his book was broken as he looked up at Daisy. Smiling, he said,
And you are the daughter of Frederick, yes?
Yes, sir.
Daisy nervously said as the man chuckled. He continued to say,
Well, how fascinating. I think I can see the resemblance.
Daisy felt nervous. There was something about the man that threw her off. She wasn't quite sure what it was, but she ignored it.
Tell me, what do you think about your father?
Daisy thought back to what her father had taught her.
Daddy says never talk to strangers.
Of course he'd tell you that. I don't think you understand yet. But I'm not a stranger, sweetheart. No, on the contrary, I'm quite well versed. I'm a family friend. If you will, a distant family friend.
Daisy looked away and started rubbing her arm up and down, replying with,
Mm-hmm.
Closing his book and sitting up straight, the man looked at Daisy with almost a sincere gesture. He said,
I know more about your father and your uncle than even you do.
Daisy was confused. How did this man know her dad, let alone her uncle?
Tell me, do you love your father?
Daisy started to nod at the man.
Good. Now, back to the reason you're here. We did promise you that you would be able to meet Goofy, your favorite character. How about it? Will you let the strangers show you Goofy? Or will you be listening to your father and not talking to strangers?
Daisy thought about it for a moment. This could be a once-in-a-lifetime thing. And what if he's telling the truth? Being a little girl, her judgment probably wasn't the best, but she really had truly no idea what this man was capable of. Besides, like her mom said earlier about her dad, you always should try new things. Daisy smiled and nodded yet again at the man, showing that she did indeed want to see Goofy, and that she trusted the man, letting out a tiny little giggle.
Oh, but of course, child. Laughter is the reason I do this, and there's nothing more powerful than a happy, happy child. However, I need you to do one thing for me.
He reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a small, old-looking, leathery book. He placed it down on the table, opened it up to what seemed to be a random page. But this man knew exactly where he was in the book as he spoke out.
I just need you to repeat after me, and all your magical fantasies will come true.
Promise? Promise?
Don't worry, dear, for I am a man of my word. All right, now repeat after me. Promito animam miam pro damatis relinquere.
Daisy started to feel a little nervous. She had never heard anything quite like that before, but she tried her best to repeat what he said.
Promito animam me pro damnates reliquili.
The moment the words rolled off her tongue, she felt her body go numb as she collapsed over onto the sofa. The lights started to fade, and the fading of the lights turned into blackness, until she heard the mechanical noise of the door as footsteps approached her. She could hear talking, but she couldn't make it out. The last thing she thought about before she dozed off was about her father. She was scared. Daisy. Before we can get to the rest of my brother's story, we kinda need to go back in time a little bit and see what's going on the surface. Above the hell, if you will.